Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jayom Vishnupad Paramhansa Paribrajakacharya Stotara Satashi Shimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sikho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Ki Jai, Shri Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. We're reading from the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 1, written by His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami. We're on Chapter 9 of the first volume, A Resident of Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada is still in Bombay, trying to make contacts, becoming more and more convinced that he's not going to have much success here in India. So therefore, he's trying to find different ways that he can go to America, although he's both homeless and penniless. But he had a mission that he had to fulfill for his spiritual master and the parampara. At that time, in 1958, August of 1958, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was the Prime Minister. He was the Prime Minister for 18 years. And this was the midterm of his domain here in India. Although his name is Pandit, Srila Prabhupada had much to say about that. Not directly to him. When Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter to him, Prabhupada was highly respectful, trying to encourage him to give up his political aspirations and take to the spiritual, cultural development of India rather than industrial and scientific development. So we'll continue from here. Although in Bombay, Abai was practically homeless, in August of 1958, he boldly wrote the Prime Minister, expressing his conviction that India's spiritual culture must not only be revived at home, but also be distributed to the West. Thank you. He reminded Pandit Nehru that from ancient Greece down to the atomic age, the Western world has seen only materialism and had therefore never known peace. If Nehru were to continue following the path of materialism, the only results would be strife and war. So last week, practically the whole class was an elaboration of a very long letter that was written to Mr. Ratanshi. And His Holiness Satsvarup Maharaj, he heard the class, and he wrote a letter of explanation why he's not putting the full letters in the Lilamrita. It's perfectly understandable because the letters are pages and pages long. So he would take excerpts from Prabhupada's letters and then give explanations according to the time and circumstances where Prabhupada was in his mission, why the things were being written like this. So the letter to Pandit Nehruji is abbreviated in the Lilamrita. But again, I feel that these letters are so important to understand Prabhupada's his mentality at that time and his manner of preaching. That I'd like to go through the full letter with you all today so we can understand in exact precision what Prabhupada is relating to the Prime Minister of the country. This was August 4th, 1958. My dear Panditji, please accept my respectful namaskar. I beg to inform you that your speech on August 2nd, 1958, at the Gurukula University, Haridwar, has given me some inspiration to inform you something about Indian culture. The basic principle of Indian culture is spiritualism, which defies the external attraction of phenomenal materialism. Now, Srila Prabhupada, of course, in those days, there was no mass media. At best, there was radio. Very few people had television in India. I remember even in the 1980s here, there was one distributor of televisions in Vrindavan. And Prabhupada would always say that there are at least 5,000 temples in Vrindavan. So I had to get some, we had a little video player in Prabhupada's house. I had to get it repaired. So I had to take it down to him. And I was just questioning, I said, how do you keep your business? Who has televisions in Vrindavan? He said, oh no, there are 5,000 televisions in Vrindavan. So India was not that advanced materially that there was a television in every house. Now we have, every single person has their own cell phone. They could communicate with anyone all over the world, but it wasn't like that in the 1950s. So Prabhupada would read the newspapers and he would express his opinion of the world activities through his Bhakti Godhead magazines and through his letters to the people. Now, this Gurukul University in Haridwar, Prabhupada, we'll read about it later, but you see, Panditji Nehru, he was very concerned that instead of having temples, we should turn the temples into factories. And he felt that the temples and the spiritual leaders were misusing the personal funds of the country for their own questionable activities. And Srila Prabhupada, in his Bhakti Godhead magazine, he said, maybe there might be some occasional fall down of spiritual leaders, perhaps by illicit connection with women or whatever. Sometimes that happens due to weakness, spiritual weakness. But who is doing the greatest misuse of personal funds than your own team members, the politicians? So let the healer heal thyself, Prabhupada said. First you look at cleaning up all the politicians and the misuse of their funds. And then Prabhupada gave another example that we all know that we have the Ramakrishna Mission Hospital here. Many of us have taken advantage of the services that they do. They do wonderful service to humanity. They consider that service to man is service to God because they don't believe in a personal form of God. So when it was inaugurated, Prabhupada lived here in Vrindavan. It was a little later, in 1963, something like that. But Prabhupada gives this example that Nehru, he flew by helicopter and came to Vrindavan to inaugurate that hospital. And although thousands upon thousands of people come to Vrindavan to pay their respects at the temple, and he was there the whole day till evening time. He did not visit a single temple in Vrindavan. He only went to the hospital, stayed there, because according to Nehru, the best thing that these spiritual organizations are doing is their humanitarian work. And in Nehru's final will and testament, he said, "I absolutely do not want any religious ceremony performed at my death. It would be a complete hypocrisy to my beliefs in life." So although he was born in a Kashmiri Brahmin family, therefore he had Pandit put at the front of his name, Prabhupada said that Pandit means one who has spiritual knowledge. And one who lacks spiritual knowledge, that is Sudra. So Prabhupada, in his very eloquent way of speaking about people, he was really saying that Nehru had no real knowledge. Nehru considered Krishna to be the greatest warmonger. And he called himself an agnostic Hindu. Prabhupada called him an atheist. There's a difference between atheist and agnostic. The atheist says there is no God. Atheist. The agnostic says "a" means without, and "gya," just like in Gyan, it means we have no knowledge. So we can't say whether there is a God or there isn't a God. There's no proof of anything. So they get around it that way. And once Nehru was asked, what is the definition of Hinduism? What is a Hindu? And he said that it's for all men, for all beliefs. Whatever a person wants to believe, that's Hinduism. So this was the prime minister at the time. And as soon as Gandhi died, although Gandhi also didn't want to give up his political position either, Prabhupada explained that the atheists, of course Gandhi was not an atheist, but the atheist thinks that nothing will go on unless I'm taking charge. Hiranyakashipu felt that way, Ravana felt that way, he put Nehru in the same, because they won't give up their post. They think, how will the country move unless I'm running it? Until death comes. And at the time of death, the agnostic believes that there is nothing after death. Nothing happens. It's all over when the body is finished. So these were the concepts Prabhupada was approaching in this letter. The basic principle of Indian culture is spiritualism, which defies the external attraction of phenomenal materialism. You are thinking of adjusting Western ways of material adjustment with Indian culture of spiritualism. And I beg to give you herewith the clue that materialism conducted with an aim of reaching spiritual perfection is the right adjustment of human activity. Now, what Prabhupada was alluding to here, because Prabhupada actually had a very high regard of Gandhiji. When Mukunda Das Goswami, before he became initiated and first met Prabhupada, he brought a picture of Nehru to Prabhupada. He thought that Nehru was a great leader and the founder of freedom in India, and he wanted to know Prabhupada's opinion. And Prabhupada, when he showed him, he said, "He's a nonsense." So now why is that? Now what Gandhi wanted was an agrarian civilization. He wanted every village to become self-sufficient, and that would solve the food, clothing, and shelter problems of the suffering population. But his disciples, his followers, especially Nehru, they wanted industrial revolution. They wanted India to become just like America. And they had 5-year plans, they had 10-year plans, how they were going to increase the industries, thinking that if they increased the industries, there was no reason for the dogma of religion. The communist philosophy is that religion is the opiate of the peoples. Opiate of the people means that what opium does is it slows down one's thinking process, and one is simply in a euphoric condition. And opium means, religion means it stops people from thinking because they have dogma that they follow, and they have set ways of thinking and set ways of reacting to other religions, and therefore the thinking process and the progress is stopped by religion. So he was against all forms of religion, actually. And he felt that instead of going to the temples and praying for things from this demigod, from that demigod, you make industry and you make money and you get what you want. It's very simple, very practical. So this was all coming from the modern atheistic philosophies that are still running and have been running since the beginning of creation. Like, why go to God for anything? You just make industry, you make a lot of money, and you get whatever you want. And that's also what the communists were saying. That why do you pray to God for bread? We'll give you bread. And they gave bread, and then the people became communists. So that was the philosophy in those days. And he was very much connected with the Russian philosophy, communism, and finally his daughter, who became soon after the prime minister, making one of the amendments to the Constitution. Now India is a socialist, secular nation. That was one of the amendments that she made. She finally fulfilled her father's dream. If the aim of spiritual realization is missed, the whole plan of materialism is sure to be frustrated, and that is the law of nature. The law of nature is so made by a superior authority, and nobody can surpass the intricacies of material nature simply by partial adjustment of material science. Now, Prabhupada had many more things to say about Nehru. Because he would speak privately with his disciples, and he once explained that Sridhar Maharaj, his godbrother, told him that there was an astrologer who predicted, or he was able to tell, that after Nehru's death, he had taken birth as a dog in Sweden. It was a very wealthy gentleman's home, and the gentleman had 2 dogs, and Nehru was one of those dogs. Now then Prabhupada said, well, whether it's true or not, we can't say. But the point is, as Prabhupada is making here, the law of nature is so made by a superior authority. The history of the West, beginning from the time of the Greeks and the Romans, down to the modern age of atomic war, is a continuous chain of sense-gratificatory materialism, and the result is that the Westerners were never in peace within the memory of 3,000 years of historical records. Now, that's just because the Western historical records only go back 3,000 years. But we have the Srimad Bhagavatam, which goes back to the beginning of creation. And always there is this conflict between the demons and the devotees, that materialism will give the highest benefit, and there's so many planets where the demons live. The subterranean planets, they're just as beautiful as the heavenly planets, but they have no God worship whatsoever. So this is the demoniac philosophy, that materialism will bring happiness, and Prabhupada is trying to break that, help him understand that. Therefore, India may not waste her time in imitating the Western way of life. You have admitted it, that the position of India's culture is of very high order. But at the same time, you want to bring in material prosperity of India by scientific advancement of knowledge. And what is that scientific knowledge? Spiritualism is also advanced scientific knowledge. So we heard last week how the chairman of the ISRO Commission, he roots all scientific knowledge to the Vedas that was taken out of India and then proclaimed to be Western inventions. So we know from our Vedic studies that all knowledge, that's what Veda means, all knowledge originates in the Vedic scriptures. Material advancement of scientific knowledge cannot give even the desired material prosperity to the people in general without spiritual help. Swaraj of Mahatma Gandhi was adjusted in spiritualism more than materialism. Yes, so when Mukunda showed that picture to Nehru, Prabhupada, he actually was lamenting. Mukunda said actually almost to the point of tears. And Prabhupada said, I loved Gandhi because he wanted to bring back this Vedic culture to India, but his disciples ruined all of his plans. So Prabhupada, even in his early days, he loved Gandhi because Gandhi had Bhagavad-Gita in his hand at all times. And the book that Nehru wrote called Discovery of India, because Prabhupada said that, we heard last week that this made in London, that everyone prefers to get things made in London, particularly Motilal Nehru, who was the father of Jawaharlal Nehru. He was extremely wealthy barrister. He would make, in those days, 500 rupees a day minimum, which was equivalent to 5,000 rupees a day. And Prabhupada had much to say about their private life. He also said that he kept 12 prostitutes, and he would invite big ministers, even the governor, to his home and corrupt their wives, because this is what happens when you're overly wealthy. So he sent Pandit Nehru to get his full education in London. And therefore, he said that Nehru was also made in London because he hated everything Indian. And therefore, this is what some historians say, what the white sahibs could not accomplish, the brown sahibs did by destroying Indian culture. Because he wanted to completely cut out the spiritual nature of Indian culture and introduce everything Western. Do you think that horseless carriage or telephonic or radio communication or any other such ephemeral facilities of life can bring in material prosperity? No, it cannot. Material prosperity means that the people must have sufficient to eat or to maintain the body and soul together in sound health for further development in spiritual consciousness, which is consciousness by its absence in the sense gratificatory life of the animal. Now, in one of Prabhupada's, because when Prabhupada wrote this letter, Nehru never replied. And after about a month, Prabhupada wrote an inquiry to the secretary of Nehru, did he receive my letter? And the secretary wrote back that yes, he received it, but he never replied it. So Prabhupada, understanding that he gave no reply to the letter, he said that Lord Chaitanya, the materialist such as Nehru, he thinks that nothing can go on without me, that I am the top person and I have to stay on top. Whereas Lord Chaitanya, he said, Trinadapi sunichena, torori ivasihishnuna. This was his philosophy. We have to be more humble than a blade of grass. And then Prabhupada compared the modern day maladies, disease, to double pneumonia. Double pneumonia means when both sides of the lung don't work. He said one side is forgetfulness of one's relationship with the absolute truth. And on the other side, the misuse of all of the resources simply for sense gratification. But Lord Chaitanya has given the remedy for this double pneumonia, and that is Sri Krishna Sankirtan. Because by Sri Krishna Sankirtan, we regain our relationship with the Supreme Lord, and we then start to use everything in His service. So although Prabhupada got no response from this letter, he answered himself how Nehru had no sense of spiritual vision and therefore had no interest in the letter Prabhupada had written. Do you think that your different plans have brought in that standard of material prosperity, or that modern Western civilization can bring in that ideal prosperity? Even they are given all the facilities of material need, yet the unrest will continue to go on till there is spiritual satisfaction of life. That is the secret of peace. And this is what Srila Prabhupada was realizing more and more. And it's a fact. Anyone who's been born in the Western countries, or even those who have left India and gone to live in the West, they will confirm the people are not happy. They have everything materially they can dream of. There's no real poverty in the Western countries. Artificially now, there might be some homelessness, things like that, because the economy has, there's no spiritual platform, so the economy has disintegrated. But even people who have all the food, all the shelter, all the conveniences in life, they have no happiness and no peace. And that's because they have no spiritual knowledge. And this is what Prabhupada is trying to convince Nehru, that you might materially try to make India more advanced, but that will not solve the problems of India. We have to bring our culture back, our spiritual culture. Both the Americans and the Russians are better materially advanced, and although they have different political philosophy of life, till they are not materially happy and peaceful, because both of them are unconsciously hankering after spiritual realization, as the child cries for the mother without expression of language. So the American concept of capitalism, that's the Vaishyas taking over the economy to make everyone wealthy by, it's called, Prabhupada called it possession. Possession can turn sand into gold. If you have your own business, you take care of it and you develop it. So capitalism is the Vaishya philosophy. And communism is the Sudra philosophy, that work is worship. You work for the good of the whole, and according to your work, you get from the whole what is allotted to you and what you require for your living. So that's the Sudra philosophy of prosperity. But neither worked. Neither the Americans are happy, nor is there peace. There's always some war going on. Nor the Russians are happy with their communism. Also, there's no peace. And as soon as Prabhupada was able to sneak his way into Russia, it was a whole different type of nuclear reaction. You look now, the wave of Russian devotees, more than anywhere else in the whole world, they're Russian devotees. They're everywhere now. They go all over to every country, and they fill up the temples. What to speak of in their own country. So exactly what Prabhupada was saying in 1958, when there was no Krishna consciousness in Russia, we're seeing today as true. You can help the people of the world for satisfying their spiritual hankering as the true Indian messenger of peace. The world has recognized your sincere effort for endeavoring peace in the world, and this is the suitable time to help your friends and at the same time glorify the standard of Indian spiritual advancement of knowledge for world peace. Please take up the matter in a cool brain. So in other words, Prabhupada was trying to encourage Nehru to preach the culture of Indian heritage, our own spiritual Indian knowledge. Nehru wasn't interested. He wanted to do just the opposite. He wanted to bring the Western culture into India rather than the Indian culture out to help the world to gain peace and happiness. Poverty means poverty of knowledge. Prime Minister Chanakya Pandit, used to live in a thatched house or cottage, but he was the dictator of India in the days of Emperor Chandragupta. So then, I hope I don't get in trouble for this. This is just things, you can find them, they're all open. Prabhupada speaks about these things to his disciples. He said that Nehru himself was a debauchee. There's so many things that came in the newspapers about him. And he had unlimited access to money. He would use that for his debauchery. So Prabhupada was giving the example of the ideal prime minister who was Chanakya Pandit. And therefore, he was trying to give him some inspiration that you should be that type of a prime minister, rather than yourself misusing funds for material prosperity and happiness. Mahatma Gandhi, your political guru, voluntarily accepted the ways of the so-called poor Indians, and still he was the dictator of India's destiny. But was he actually poverty-stricken on account of his plain living with the primitive charkha? He was always proud of his spiritual knowledge. As a matter of fact, Prabhupada was speaking about also at one time, he has so much to say about this era. He said that the political activists, they would be put into jail, and as soon as they were let out of jail, they would die because they were being poisoned in the jail. So he said Mahatma Gandhi, he refused to eat any jail food. He would keep a goat and just drink the goat's milk. So both he and Nehru and all these leaders, they were put into jail many times by the British for their anti-British movement. And Nehru, up until the time of his death, he still insisted on remaining as the prime minister. But Prabhupada is bringing the point that your guru, Gandhi, he lived a simple life, simple living and high thinking. That's where Prabhupada got this mentality, just what's in this paragraph here. Therefore, it is the spiritual knowledge which makes a man really rich, and not the radio set or the motor car. Please, therefore, try to understand this position of Indian culture, and try to give it to the Western brothers in the prescribed standard method of the liberated persons, and that will be an exchange of Indian culture with Western material advancement, and necessarily bring in a happy life in the peaceful world. So one time Nehru went to America. Prabhupada said it was in the time of President Eisenhower, and some people, because he was from India, and the people were very interested, even in that time, in the 50s and the 60s, already there was an awakening, because after the World War, America became so prosperous, and the children of those prosperous parents turned out to become hippies, because they saw that their parents, they had everything money-wise, but they were miserable. So they rejected that material life. They were looking for spiritual life. So when Nehru came to America in the 60s, some of the audience asked him to explain the Bhagavad-Gita to them. Because his name was Pandit, he was supposed to be a Brahmin. And he openly admitted that I don't have any knowledge of the Bhagavad-Gita, so therefore I can't explain it, because he had no interest in the teachings of Krishna. Here is a program of spiritual movement, an appeal enclosed herewith. He gave his League of Devotees prospectus. I am struggling alone, very hard, to give it an effective shape without any help from persons like you. You can help the movement a lot without the least difficulty or disturbances. Now, it so happened that when Nehru did die, they had to immediately, because he died while in office, they had to put a new prime minister immediately, and they chose Lal Bahadur Shastri. Now, Lal Bahadur Shastri, although he was an activist and he was a Gandhi follower, He did what Prabhupada did. He gave up his education, didn't take his diploma, although he was from a Kayasta family. So he very much appreciated what Prabhupada was doing. And Prabhupada had a personal audience with him. Prabhupada gave him his volume 2 of Srimad Bhagavatam. And he wrote a letter to Shastriji. We'll come to that in a few weeks maybe. And Prime Minister Shastriji replied that letter. And he said that your books are of great value and I want these in the Ministry of Education. So Prabhupada got an order of 50 volume 1s, and then after Shastriji saw the volume 2, he had the Minister of Education order 50 more volumes. So this is when Prabhupada was gaining success. And with Shastriji, he was able to get some support with his ideals of taking this Indian culture into the English language and sharing it with the rest of the world. Shastriji had that vision that Nehru lacked. My humble advice to you, as I am your old friend from Allahabad. Oh, Prabhupada also mentioned he once went to the Nehru's house, and he said everything was Europeanized. The whole house was European. And the physician of Motilal Nehru told Prabhupada, Abhay at the time, that because Abhay had made some special palti medicine that you take in a clay pot. Prabhupada wasn't explaining what it was for. Something like, I don't know what it was, because they couldn't understand what Prabhupada was saying when they were transcribing. So it just had blanks. But the physician said, no, I can't give this to Motilal Nehru, because he told me that when it comes to medicine, do not give me anything Indian. So this is also medicine, and they weren't taking it. I am your old friend from Allahabad. Is that you should now take leave from your present responsibility of prime ministership. And as you are a popular gentleman of the world, you can just engage the rest of your most valuable life in this organized spiritual movement to achieve the aim of your life, which is yet to be known by the world. By pushing on this authorized spiritual movement, you can make real adjustment of the Western material science combined with Indian way of spiritual realization, which Prabhupada again and again used, the lame man and the blind man. Working together, then they can progress forward. Please, therefore, think over this proposal very seriously and let me know your reaction upon it. There was no reaction. And oblige. If you can spare a little time, I am sure to convince you about its importance more quickly. Thanking you in anticipation and awaiting your early reply. Yours sincerely. So there was no reply. Now we'll go on with what Satsrup Maharaj has to say about this letter. Even without having been to the West, Abhay expressed his conviction that the Americans and even the Russians were hankering for spiritual realization. They could not have become satisfied merely with material advancement. Pandit Nehru, therefore, should help his friends in the West by offering them spiritual knowledge from India. Back in the 1930s, the Nehru family had bought their medicines from Abhay's Prayag pharmacy. And Abhay now appealed to Pandit Nehru as an old friend from Allahabad. Just as Abhay had requested Mahatma Gandhi, he requested Nehru to leave his political responsibilities and, as a popular gentleman of the world, engage the rest of your life in this organized spiritual movement to make a real adjustment of Western material science combined with Indian way of spiritual realization. As with his letter to Gandhi, his letter to Nehru went unanswered. Now, some of us might wonder, Where did these letters come from? How did we get these letters? When Satsvaru Maharaj had to write the authorized biography of Srila Prabhupada, how was he able to find these letters? Well, Guru Das, our first temple president here, he was sent by Prabhupada to Vrindavan in 1970, before Prabhupada brought his World Sankirtan Party devotees here, because he wanted to get a temple here. And he sent Guru Das on a mission to try to find an appropriate place for a temple. And then Prabhupada came in 1972, because by that time, Prabhupada, when he came in 1971, he met with Mr. Kashi Prasad Saraf. Kashi Prasad Saraf showed him this land. And in 1972, Prabhupada went to stay in the home of the Sarafs in Govindavan. And they gave him the whole upper floor of their home. They had a beautiful home. One whole floor was a temple. We used to go there regularly. Every week I would go there to teach Mrs. Saraf English. And she never learned English. She taught me Hindi instead. So that was she was like she still is. She comes every year. She's my mother here. So they gave Prabhupada a whole floor of their house for the devotees to stay in. 6 rooms upstairs. And below that was the beautiful temple of Radha Kunja Bihari that gave this temple to Prabhupada, this land to Prabhupada. So when Prabhupada was upstairs making, Guru Das explains it, you can read in his book by his example. Prabhupada was like a circus ringleader. In one room, he had the Goswamis headed by Gaurachan Goswami. In another room, he had the Goswamis headed by Madan Mohan Goswami. They lived right across the courtyard from each other, but didn't speak to each other for years. They were always battling. So Prabhupada that day was able to make an agreement to get his 2 rooms for life by rental, because they were also battling for those 2 rooms. Then the Sarafs, they signed the agreement to turn over the land. The next day, Prabhupada did the groundbreaking ceremony. So that evening, Prabhupada called Guru Das, and he took out, Prabhupada always carried a little bag with him. He took out 2 keys, very old keys, and he said, he handed them to Guru Das. He said, "You guard these with your life." So Guru Das took them and he tied a string to them, and he tied the string inside of his bead bag, because he knew he would never lose his bead bag, so the keys would stay there. But Prabhupada didn't tell him what to do with the keys. He just told him to guard them with your life. So a few months later, Prabhupada came back, and he said, no, he sent a letter to Guru Das. He said, "Those keys are the keys to my 2 rooms at the Radha Damodar temple. I want you to go there. I want you to open up the rooms. And anything that's not of significant value, you burn. And anything that's of value, you save." So Guru Das, he didn't feel confident to do this alone. So he asked Jamuna and his friend Giriraj, because the 3 of them had been sent by Prabhupada to open a temple in Delhi. So they were all very closely united. Giriraj took Jamuna and Guru Das to be his parents, his Krishna conscious parents. So he asked them to come and open the rooms with him. And first he couldn't get the lock open. It hadn't been opened for years. Finally he opened it. And there were all of Prabhupada's papers in his room. He had all of his Back to Godhead stacked up. He had his list of life members. He had his day's ointment advertisement. He had all of his subscription papers. Everything was there. And there also, were these letters. And this is how we were able to get all of these letters from that time the Guru Das first opened up the room. And they were all preserved. So these letters, by the grace of our senior devotees, we have these letters still to learn how to preach to prime ministers. Among Abhai's former Bombay contacts was Mr. Harbans Lal, a landlord who had once assured Abhay that he would provide him lodging whenever he needed. In the summer of 1958, Abhay went to call on Mr. Harbans Lal, only to find that he had gone to the West. When Abhay learned that Mr. Harbans Lal was traveling not only on business, but on a cultural mission, his imagination seized on the idea of an Indian on a cultural mission in the West. He wrote to Mr. Harbans Lal asking for a place to stay, but also presenting his own cultural mission. So I have that letter also, because in this letter, Prabhupada explains what his future plan is for bringing the Vedic culture to the Western world. My dear Harbans Lalji, I am very glad to learn that you have now gone to foreign countries for tour on business as well as cultural mission. And I hope that you are enjoying there both your good health as well as the trouting experience. We had a German friend, Indian, domiciled for the past 20 years, who is a great scholar in several languages. He used to say that in Germany especially, wherever an Indian goes, especially the student, the Germans receive him well in the proportion of his Indian cultural knowledge. Now, we had that experience if you read the biography of Bhakti Charu Swami. What's it? Causeless Mercy. Ocean of Mercy. He went to Germany as a student. Now, when he lived in India, he wasn't so spiritually inclined. But when he went to Germany and he saw the Western culture and he saw the need of spiritual life, there he became spiritually inclined. And he decided to come back to India to learn the roots of his own spiritual culture. So at this time, Prabhupada is speaking about his German godbrother who came here with Ban Maharaj, who lived here and became a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So that there in Germany, they received them in proportion to their Indian cultural knowledge, because they were seeking knowledge at that time, the Indian knowledge, Vedic knowledge. Scholars and thinkers in Europe, especially in Germany and Russia, know it well that for learning about cultural knowledge, nobody can surpass the Indians who have a background of centuries engaged in spiritual investigation. According to Indian way of thought, everyone is advised to do good to others, namely not only to the human society, but also to living beings other than human beings. Now, this is the greatest complaint that Srila Prabhupada had about Pandit Nehru. As soon as he took over as prime minister, he paid one Dr. Mukherjee to write a book, how it's authorized and perfectly all right, according to the Vedic Shastras, to engage in cow slaughter. And Nehru opened up cow slaughterhouses for the first time in India. Not only did he do that, he opened up cow slaughtering, but he made the first law that allowed divorce, which was never allowed previously in India. So those two things he did. Prabhupada, he explained that previous to that, in India, in Indian culture, not during the time of the invasions of the Mughals and the British, everyone followed according to the Manu Samhita. Those were the laws for humanity. And of course, cow slaughter and divorce were prohibited according to Manu Samhita. But then Prabhupada says, we're not trying to go back to reinstate all of the laws of Manu Samhita. That's not possible in this day and age. But at least, also to living beings other than human beings, at least we have to treat the animals on the same level that we would treat our own self. The Indians are not cow worshippers, as others wrongly interpret it, but the Indians are gratitudeful to the species of cow for supplying milk to the human babies, and the sentiment is so fine that simply for supplying milk, the cow is accepted as one of the 7 mothers. That is called Indian cultural mission. Now, when the cow slaughterhouses were instituted here in India, there was a huge rioting and revolution by the sadhus. And that was the time when Mukunda said to Prabhupada, well, we want to go to India. And then Mukunda read in the newspapers that there was huge rioting going on because of the cow slaughter. And then he decided, well, it's not a good time to go to India. So then he went to San Francisco and they opened up the second temple, the San Francisco temple. So this was going on nationally. The religious people were not happy about the cow slaughtering that Nehru paid this doctor to write the book about. And then he also made this doctor a member of parliament for doing this work. So he was very much against the policies that were instituted by Nehru, Prabhupada. That is called Indian cultural mission. We should learn to look upon every living being as our own brother and treat him in that love. Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy began from this philosophy of universal brotherhood, which is not restricted to the humankind, but to all the species of life. That is the sign of real intelligence. In the Bhagavad-Gita, it is stated that a learned man looks upon a well-educated Brahmin who is well-behaved by education, and so also upon a Chandala who is accustomed to eat the dogs. And what is the purport of this equal vision? The purport is that we should look upon everyone as the spark of the Supreme Brahman, and we should not look upon the outer dress, which everyone has to give up one birth after another. So this, Prabhupada would also going back to Nehru and Gandhi. He would say, where is Gandhi now? Where is Nehru now? No one can tell us. But they felt themselves to be so important that they would not give up their posts, even up to the last moment of their life. So this Prabhupada, again and again, he's trying to convince people that do not work for materialism up to your last breath. You have to use this human life for preaching this real culture of universal brotherhood, and that will make people happy. I hope you will preach this Indian way of thinking everywhere in the foreign countries, wherever you have the opportunity. I think that people need this Indian message in this hour of necessity, when the atomic bomb is hovering over the head of the human society. So this was 1958, now it's 2023, and that atomic bomb is still hovering over the head. Every day you can read about it in the newspapers. Who will drop the first bomb that will destroy the entire humanity? So nothing has changed. You know that I am attached with one cultural mission of the name of the League of Devotees, as well as Indian Cultural Congress, which is trying to broadcast this message of Para Upakar. The standard of Para Upakar should be such as will be useful both in the current life as well as life after death. Every sane man thinks of Para Upakar in that way. Temporary sense gratification is not real Para Upakar. Please therefore begin these para-upakara activities in the foreign countries as you have gone there. I think your going there is another preaching of the Indian culture as above mentioned. I shall be glad to be in touch with you by correspondence so that I may be giving you my humble suggestion for this service. By the by, I may inform you that as you know, I am passing my days in Bombay in great inconvenience for want of a suitable residential place. I may remind you in this connection that your goodness promised me some place in your flats as soon as one of them is vacant. I understand that some are going to be vacated soon, and I shall request you to help me by giving me a flat and thus mitigate my difficulties. And then the rest of the letter is missing, so it stops there. Yes. Clearly, Abai would have liked to have gone himself. He was giving advice to Mr. Harbanslal, but obviously Prabhupada wanted to go himself. Abai also reminded Mr. Harbanslal of his promise to provide him with an apartment. Wanting to go to the West as soon as possible, but the letter never caught up with the touring Mr. Harbanslal. The letter never even reached him, unfortunately, but we have the letter to learn from. Wanting to go to the West as soon as possible, Abai visited one of his godbrothers in Bombay, Kripa Sindhu, and asked him to help. So Kripa Sindhu, according to the biography of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati that's written by Bhakti Vikas Swami, he has a list of all of the disciples' names at the back of the book in one of the appendices. The sannyasis, the babajis, the brahmacharis. So Kripa Sindhu, according to that list, was a grihasta disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who was stationed in Bombay. Sri Guru Gauranga, Vinoda, Vaibhavanandaji. That was the name of the temple, the mutt in Bombay that Prabhupada originally, they wanted him to be the president of. Kripa Sindhu says, he came to my house and asked me to help him in going to America. He gave me some Back to Godheads, which he said I could show to people and ask for help on his behalf. I tried to do something in this regard. I introduced Abai Babu to one man, a big industrialist, Hemraj Khandawal. I went also. The three of us sat down and I told the man how Abai wanted to go to the West and how he was a good devotee and was writing and doing so many things. But somehow or other, the man did not help. So we'll hear further Prabhupada's attempts in Bombay, and then finally how he returns to Vrindavan to concentrate on writing the Srimad Bhagavatam. Hare Krishna. Jai.